Thanks to everybody for making it out. It's a little warm out there, warmer than it's supposed to be this time of the year. But thanks for braving the heat, coming on out. We have a great presentation lined up for you today. And so I guess we'll give our sponsors, Bass & Associates, a chance to talk. Bruce?
Sure. Yeah, just take a minute. Thanks for having us here tonight. I hope you all got enough to eat. There's lots of food out there, so don't be shy if you want to go get some more. During the it looks like it's okay to eat here, so you can go do that. And chances are we'll have a little bit left over at the end, and we'll try to kind of package it up if anybody wants to take some with them on the way out. I'm not sure how familiar all of you are with Bass & Associates, but we are actually celebrating 20 years in business this year in Omaha, so we're pretty excited about that. And we provide IT consulting services and certainly love the whole Microsoft suite, but we're generalists. We're not just Microsoft oriented only. We have quite a technology stack that we work with, as well as project managers and business analysts and QA people and everything in between. So thanks again for coming out, and it's a great crowd. It's a great group, maybe one of the bigger ones I've seen. So must be a good presentation. Looking forward to that, and we'll have some great things to give away here at the end. A couple of bottles of wine, and I think 4 different gift certificate cards for $50 each to various places. So stick around to the end for the giveaway. All right, thank you.
And hosting it is obviously Farm Credit.
Hi, welcome again. My name is Jeff Bramwell. I'm Director of Enterprise Architecture at Farm Credit Services of America. And real quick, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're a financial lending institution for agricultural customers out of Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, and Wyoming. So we basically loan farmers money to buy their machinery, seed, whatever they need, that type of thing. We're very technology oriented here. We have about 140-ish folks in our IT department overall. We spent the last 4 days here with Everett learning a lot more around UX design and whatnot. We're getting more and more into mobile.
And you're still standing.
And we're still standing 4
Yeah.
days later, yeah. So it's been a great experience. So I'm looking forward to the talk. But again, I'm not going to stand up here very long. Just real quick, some logistics. You probably have discovered the restrooms are right out through that wall right there. And then when you leave later this evening, please leave your badges down where you got them on the counter below. And good evening. Thanks.
And a big thanks to our hosts and sponsors. Without them, we'd be out in the heat and hungry. So. I guess maybe just a few community announcements. I know HTC is right around the corner. I don't know if they're sold out yet or not. Anybody know if they're sold out? Okay, they may not be sold out. They do typically sell out, so if they're not sold out yet, they will be shortly. But it's a great local conference. No traveling or anything, just right here in Omaha. So it's a great conference to go to if you're interested in that sort of stuff. Is there any other comments or anything or announcements from the group? Okay. With that, we will turn it over to Everett to educate us on some UI stuff.
All right, thank you very much. Let's get started. So, how's my volume in the back? It's all right? All right, perfect. All right, so good evening, everyone. Oh, good evening. So I just wanted to say I'm thrilled to be here. This is my very first time to be not only in Omaha, but also in Nebraska. So I had a good week here. I'm thrilled to be here. As someone from out of state, never been here before, of course someone said I've got to go and get a steak here at a good restaurant. So I went to, I believe it's called Spezia, a couple nights ago, and I got a steak. Honestly, I was skeptical. I was thinking, I live in Vermont. I was thinking, how good could it be? We've got good beef back home. How good could it possibly be? It was amazing. It was like the most perfect cut of beef I've ever seen in my life. So when I go back home, of course, I'm going to tell everyone how wonderful Omaha beef is. All right, so welcome to Don't Design Like a Programmer. So just to get started, I'd like to introduce myself a little bit. So my name's Everett McKay. My company is UX Design Edge. As I mentioned, I am in Vermont. And my company offers basically user interface design consulting and training services to companies that are basically software development firms that don't have sufficient design resources, which I've discovered is pretty much everybody. So business is good. So before I started my company 3 years ago, I was a senior program manager at Microsoft. I started on the Windows Server team and then moved over to the Windows Client team, where I was personally responsible for the Windows User Experience Guidelines. So that was a great experience for me learning about UI there. Before I joined Microsoft, my background was actually in programming. So I was a developer of primarily Macintosh and Windows UIs. So to answer the question everybody's wondering, yes, in fact, I am a programmer. So I'm speaking from experience here. So here's what I'd like to cover. So I'd like to start with a personal story that I'm calling the revelation. And this really kind of it was a situation that I had at Microsoft that really kind of raised my game in terms of understanding what UI design is all about. So I'd like to share that experience with you. And then when I talk about designing like a programmer, I'd like to actually define exactly what I mean here, the phenomenon I'm seeing when people are doing what I'm calling designing like a programmer. So I want to explain in specific terms what that means to me. And rather than just complain, I actually want to share 3 techniques that we can use to create better designs. So the first one is scenario-based design, another one is communication-based design, and the third one is a very interesting technique that was actually developed at Microsoft called inductive UI that you might have heard of, but you haven't probably heard of much lately. So I'm going to share with you what that's all about. And then lastly, I want to talk about design culture a little bit. Ultimately, we ship our culture, so I think there's something to be said for thinking about the design culture we have at our company. All right, so let's start with the thing I'm calling the revelation. So here's the thing. I've been doing UI design work for quite a while before I joined Microsoft, so this was something I was very familiar with. And while I was learning as a developer to do better UI work, I did a lot of research. I read a lot of books. So for example, I read books by people like Jacob Nielsen, and they would, they'd basically make the case that great UI is all about understanding users, right? So we need to know about the users, user goals, user empathy, usability. So, a lot of these books, they talk about users. And Alan Cooper's book, About Face, was very influential when I started working in the UI field, and he pretty much said the same thing. In fact, when I wrote my first book called Developing User Interfaces for Microsoft Windows, I pretty much said the same thing myself. So this is something I understood quite well. The bottom line is if we want to do better design work, we really have to understand our users. That's really what it's all about. And this is something I thought I understood quite well. Or so I thought, until this particular event happened. There we go. So as I mentioned, I was working on the Windows team at Microsoft. And one thing that was very interesting about being on the Windows team is they did a lot of usability studies. So they're constantly running usability studies, bringing users in, doing tests, seeing how well they perform with the various UIs. And what they would do is send out announcements, and I see the announcements, and I actually show up for these things. I showed up for quite a lot of these things. And I found it to be a very enlightening experience. I really learned quite a lot from watching users use our software. I thought it was a fascinating experience. But there's one usability study in particular that really stood out in my mind. And so it was for a feature in Windows XP that was called the Files and Settings Transfer Wizard. Files and Settings Transfer Wizard, in other words, FAST. Their acronym for it was FAST, Files and Settings Transfer Wizard. So of course the purpose of this is you bought a new PC, you've got your old settings on your old computer, old files, the whole bit. They wanted a tool to help you migrate from one computer to the other. And in fact, this is what it looks like. This was the first screen in the wizard. So Files and Settings Transfer Wizard, they're asking you, is this your new computer or your old one? And so the choices are new. This is all pretty straightforward. We have to say which one it is so we know which way to transfer the files. The next page looked like this. So we have to select a transfer method. This is actually kind of an interesting UI. Now remember, this is kind of like from 2000, so this is a bit old. You would think that the network option would be the obvious one, but it's the second one. I don't know why it's disabled in this screenshot. Obviously today it would be enabled. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe there was no network. Actually, I find the third option here a bit amusing. Logic disk. Is that really going to happen? You know, if we have a PC with like a gigabyte of stuff on it, you know, can you really see this happening? Going to Amazon and buying $1,400 worth of floppy disks to make that happen. So, you know, the funny thing is, this just feels so Microsoft, right? I mean, we just had to have that option. I don't know why. We can't explain it. Totally not practical, but there it is. All right, but it's the third step that I want to focus on, because this is the specific step where I have that revelation. So, before I proceed, just want to take a quick look at this. So the question is, what do you want to transfer? The options are settings only, files only, or both files and settings. What do you think? Just take a look. Tell me what, you know, don't say yet what you think, but just take a quick look. See what you think of this UI. Do you see any issues here? Think this is a good UI, bad UI? Just try to get some sort of assessment. What do you think? All right, before I proceed, anyone care to share? What do you think? What do you see here? Is this good or bad? What do you think?
Checkbox. The checkbox should be with the buttons.
Okay, so you think it should be with it? You mean physically it's in the wrong place?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Got duplication of the item. What you want to transfer.
Right, that's true. Especially in XP, that's seen that come up quite a lot. It basically is what I call design by template. The template kind of wanted two different strings there, so if there wasn't two, that duplicate it. That's kind of a bad habit to fall into. Any other thoughts on this?
Instead of saying, do you want this or both, I'd go with two checkboxes. A checkbox for settings and a checkbox for files.
Okay, so if there's really maybe two options here rather than three. Let's present it more accurately, perhaps. All right, very good. Any other thoughts? All right.
My thought is that it's useless because you want to do both,
Okay,
typically.
all right. That's probably true. Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, so here's the deal. So here we are, we're in the lab. So I wasn't on the team doing this. I'm just an observer. I got the invitation. I show up. The team is there. They're kind of watching this guy. I'm there. We're watching this guy. The guy is silent. By the way, in a usability study, we asked people to think out loud so they're verbalizing their thoughts. As I recall, he wasn't doing that. He was just kind of silently looking at the screen, so we're wondering what the heck is he going to do. As I recall, he's doing what I call a mouse grind. He's kind of like grinding away at the mouse, trying to figure out what to do. But he's silent. We have no idea what he's going to do. In fact, let's give him a name. Let's say here he is. Here's the user. Let's call him Chip. By the way, is anyone here named Chip? All right, last time I gave the presentation, it turns out the leader of the presentation was named Chip, so that turned out scandalous. All right, so we'll call him Chip. All right, so here's Chip. He's grinding away. He's looking at this. We're wondering what he's going to say. And he says the most amazing thing I've ever heard a user say. This was the revelation. It's the most amazing thing. And he said, ready? All right, because this is totally amazing, right? So I want you to be ready. This requires an appropriate build-up. All right, ready? He said, I don't want to copy over all that crap. And I'm thinking, whoa, he's right. He doesn't want to copy over all that crap, does he? In fact, I don't want to copy over all that crap, which is why I don't use utilities like this. Here we are, we're wondering which one of these buttons he's going to push. He's not thinking about that at all. He's thinking, is this thing going to do what I want it to do? We were focused on the mechanics. He was focused on his goals. And I think that was really the key to the revelation. We're so focused on the technology and getting tasks done mechanically that we're kind of missing the entire point of a lot of the UI work that we do. So, you know, we talk about user-centered design all the time. If you're designing, that's, you know, we just talk about it all the time. But, you know, what does that really mean? Well, I think what it really means is that for truly user-centered design, that designers and users must be focused on the same thing. If we're focused on different stuff, if they're focused on the goals, we're focused on the mechanics, we're not really going to be designing well for our users. So, at this point, so that's my revelation. That's the thing that really kind of got me to realize that I wasn't quite as good at this as I thought I was. All right, so I want to talk about what it means to design like a programmer. So I want to define this. And in order to do this, I want to play a game that I call Bad Design CSI. All right, so Bad Design CSI, so the idea is we enter the scene of a bad design crime. and we kind of gather evidence to kind of figure out what happened, and then kind of reconstruct it. And if you believe in Occam's razor, you'll believe that the simplest solution is probably the actual solution, right? So this is not a complete waste of time. If we can come up with a simple solution, explain stuff, we're probably coming up with the right thing here. And I love David Caruso, by the way. He cracks me up saying this is obviously CSI Miami. I love how much drama he's able to get out of 4 words and removing his glasses. So I'll give it a go. All right, ready? All right, we will find out. That work? All right. Thank you. All right, so let's start this game here. So we're going to start with the boss, and the boss tells the team, hey, we need a wizard to copy files and settings to a new PC. And so here's the boss, obviously in a good mood. And right there, by the way, we got a problem, don't we? You see a problem here? Right, so the boss says we want a wizard to copy files and settings. Guess what we're going to get? We're going to get a wizard that's going to copy files and settings. Whether or not that's actually what the user needs to achieve their goals, we're not going to find out, are we? We probably aren't even going to challenge it or ask the question. We're going to go, okay, and we do it, right? Isn't that what we do? All right, so right off the bat, we got a problem. So we need a wizard for this. So what we're going to do then is we're going to figure out technically how to get this problem solved, right? So we're going to come up with some data structures, some algorithms, some stuff to get the bits from one machine to another. And by the way, this is a big deal. I don't want to take for granted that this is trivial. This is hard work. Trying to get the bits from one machine to another and actually have a living, breathing program at the other end, that's probably a big deal. There's probably some serious technology involved there, especially with Windows, because programs are pretty complex in Windows, right? So I wouldn't be a bit surprised if there's several patents and all sorts of things involved here. This is not trivial by any means. This is a big deal, but we figure out how to actually get it to work. Then we write the code to try to get it to work on the back end and kind of make sure, yeah, sure, in fact, we can transfer these things across from one machine to another. And while we're doing this, we're probably finding a few things that we need from users. And so we're probably building a data structure as we go. So we've got this data structure here, and we're thinking, okay, rather than figuring this stuff out, we're going to ask the user this stuff. So we're going to present this to a user. All right, so we're going to have to come up with some sort of UI to do this. So we kind of take that data structure, stick it on the screen. Right, here it is. And then we probably have a meeting with all the stakeholders and the managers and everybody, and so they give us feedback and they say, you know what, this is great, but it's a little simple, isn't it? Maybe we should add some more power and flexibility to the UI, because we like powerful, flexible stuff. We're Microsoft, right? So we got to have power and flexibility. So let's add a few more settings just to get more power and flexibility. And then what we do is we do some testing and we discover that users aren't clicking the submit button. So it's as developers, oh crap, what's going on? The users aren't clicking submit. So we try to address that. So maybe, maybe we make the submit button a little bit more obvious. And maybe if that doesn't work, maybe we make the cancel button less obvious. Maybe we make the click button bigger. And maybe we just, we go all out here. So we make sure that users are going to click this button. Right? So we do the usability study, and if you've been in one of these situations, and many of you might have been in a usability study where you've got the one-way mirror, you've got the team on one side and the user on the other, probably what the team's going is, they're just saying, click the button, just click the button, just click the damn button, and the user's not clicking the button, and we're like, what's going on? Why aren't they clicking the button? Don't they get it? So, first of all, the thing is, Chip is thinking about other stuff than we are, right? So Chip is thinking stuff like, what does this page do? What am I supposed to do here? Am I even in the right place? Maybe I'm not in the right place. Maybe there should be somewhere else. What does this label mean? Is this thing going to really meet my needs? Am I going to be able to trust it? Is this really what I want to do? And why is this button red? Did I do something wrong? So that's the kind of things our users are thinking about. But the thing I want to stress here is that users aren't stupid. I mean, look at this guy. Chip is a smart guy, right? He's a smart guy. It's not like he's stupid, right? So, people will say to me, well, the secret to a good UI is to dumb things down. And quite frankly, I never think about it in those terms. It's not about dumbing things down. It's not like our users are stupid. It's that they don't understand the program the same way we do. Right, so they're busy, they're focused on their work, they have fundamental questions and challenges that we don't think about. But one thing they do know is they do know how to click on stuff. That's not the problem. Another thing they don't know is how our UI works. We know exactly how it works. We know what's going to come next. We know how to get there. We know that it's going to do what we think it's going to do. They don't know any of that stuff. As they're going through the program, they have to kind of demonstrate all that stuff for themselves, and we take all that stuff for granted. All right, so note that all those things that we as developers just did to make sure that the users are going to click on that button, it addressed none of these issues that I just mentioned. Right? We've accomplished nothing. Users won't proceed in a task until they're confident. We need to build their confidence. You're in the right place, you're doing the right thing, this is going to achieve your goals. We take all that for granted. There's a variety of what I call classic programmer mistakes. When we're designing like a programmer, we have a tendency to do the following things. First thing we do is design for ourselves. Now it works for us, what's the problem? It should work for everybody, right? Another thing we do is we focus on the technology and the features. That's what we're trying to get the task done mechanically, so we focus on the technology required to do the task. We don't really think about the users and their goals. We just kind of presume, of course, it's going to work. We often think that solving a problem mechanically is good enough. So we got a problem, we have a solution that kind of solves the problem mechanically. Isn't that good enough? What's wrong with that? Isn't that good enough? Shouldn't users be able to use that? Very often what that means is we end up exposing those raw data structures. So as we're trying to get the mechanics to work, we have the certain questions we want our users to answer. We just stick that data structure directly on the screen and expect it to be usable. That's very often not the case. We often have UIs that are unintuitive and non-standard. We don't know what the standards are. We just kind of think we do, so we kind of cobble things together that are kind of hard to use because they're not what users are familiar with. We have over-complex UIs. Very often what we try to do is just cram everything onto a single page because that seems easier and more streamlined to us. And very often if users don't get it, we think, well, you know, RTFM. Everybody know what RTFM means? All right. Very good. And very often what we do is design by committee as well. You know, it's like if everybody is happy, if all the stakeholders are happy, we've got a good UI. And obviously that's not always the case. All right, another thing I see when I see people design like a programmer is what I call UI Tetris. So the idea is we've got like these feature requests kind of floating down from space, and we kind of take our UI and we kind of just shift it around and drop the features where they fit. So that's UI Tetris. So we put things on pages not because they belong, but because they fit there physically. And the interesting thing is with UI Tetris is we can play that for a while and do pretty well, but eventually it's game over. You know, we just have too much crap, not all that stuff fits anymore, it's not working for us. All right, so why do we do all this stuff? Well, first of all, of course, it's easier to develop. It's easier just to stick that data structure directly on the screen. Seems to work pretty well, so what's the problem? We're not aware that there's better solutions out there, and we don't even really notice the usability problems because we understand exactly how it works. We know what we're supposed to do, so we don't see the problem. So the way I see it is we as programmers don't create these bad user experiences intentionally. We do it because we just don't know any better. We're just not aware of the problem. We're not aware that there's better solutions out there. All right, so I like to look at user experience design as basically a big giant tool chest, a variety of things that we can do to make things better. So, you know, I've got a lot of tools in my tool chest, but I've got a few that I'd like to share with you today. The four specifically are scenario-based design, effective human communication, this intuitive task flow that we're calling inductive UI, and then finally I want to share some thinking on design culture. So let's work with this specific problem a little bit more with scenario-based design. All right, so I find that scenario-based design is really one of the best design tools we've got because that's really going to help us make better design decisions from our target user's point of view. So we really have to understand what the user's trying to accomplish, and that's going to help us understand what we need to put in our designs a whole lot better. All right, so I don't know if you're familiar with the Ugly Baby episode from Seinfeld, but if you've ever wondered why people don't respond to your baby the way you think they should, I think this is where we want to be looking. This kind of explains what's going on here. So what is a scenario exactly? Well, a scenario describes a specific target user trying to achieve a specific goal or task in a specific environment. So the three things I'm looking at: who are the user, what is their goal or task? Could be one, could be the other, could be both. So that's why I put goal or task. Or what's the environment? Where are they doing this? What context are they in? So these are the three key elements. I see, however, very often as developers, when we're testing our UIs and evaluating our UIs, we kind of throw random stuff at it. We kind of like do a random search, get a random result, choose a random thing, do a random thing with it. And that's really hard to evaluate. You know, we don't have random people doing random things for random reasons in random contexts. And if we design for random people, guess what? We're going to have kind of random designs. We need to do better than this, and that's what scenario-based design gets us. All right, so to see the value of scenario-based design, I first want to compare it to feature-based design. So very often we design in terms of features, right? So the feature here is we need a files and settings transfer wizard. That's the feature. What insight does this give us? What can we do with this to figure out how to better achieve the user's needs? What insight does this give us? What does this tell us about what we need to do to be successful? It doesn't give us a lot, does it? Not really much of anything. All right, so let's not do that. All right, how about task-based design? So the task is we need to transfer files and settings from the old PC to the new PC. It's kind of similar to the feature. Actually, this is a little better, because if we look at the previous one, it says wizard here, where this is more focused on what we need to do. So at least this one doesn't have a solution in it. So we can have more broad thinking in terms of figuring out what we need to do here. So this is actually an improvement, I think, over the feature-based design. But still, this doesn't give us a tremendous amount of insight, does it? It doesn't really tell us anything. All right, how about this for a scenario? Notice the question mark. So Joe bought a new PC. He discovered the Files and Settings Transfer Wizard, which enables him to copy programs, files, and settings from his old PC to his new one. Joe is thrilled. By the way, this actually looks like scenarios I used to see at Microsoft, which is nice. Put this in. So what do you think of this? Is this helpful? No. Oh, what is this? This is like a feature advertisement, right? We're going to have, if we ship some feature, we're going to have a thrilled user for some reason. This doesn't give us any insight either. All right, so let's not do that. Hopefully you'll find this one's a little better. All right, so Joe just bought a new PC. While he was thrilled with his old PC when he first bought it, its performance has degraded over time. He's not entirely sure why. Perhaps it just has too much junk installed, or perhaps it has viruses and malware. Regardless, Joe has decided to upgrade. Joe would like to copy the programs and files from his old PC that he still uses and leaves the other stuff behind. He knows the programs and documents that he uses frequently from memory. He can recognize the files that he uses occasionally, but he's not too sure about the rest. He doesn't know the specific file names and locations. Does this seem like a little more accurate scenario in terms of what we might actually be doing here? Does this help us understand what we're trying to do to achieve the user's goals?
It also says why.
Yeah,
It gives the reason.
it does, doesn't it? And very often we just take that for granted. It's like, oh, they're going to do it, right? Well, maybe. All right, so what does this scenario tell us? Well, first of all, Joe doesn't want to transfer everything. He just wants to transfer the stuff he cares about. If he's got the typical PC, quite frankly, it's got a whole lot of crap that he doesn't want on the new one, right? We don't want all that stuff. We just want the stuff we care about. All right, he doesn't want files or settings. He wants both. I can't imagine why you'd want one or the other. It's crazy. But he doesn't know specifically what to transfer, does he? He knows the stuff he uses all the time, but the other stuff, does he know or not? We don't know, do we? He probably doesn't. So how's he going to choose that stuff from a list if he doesn't know? He needs help, doesn't he? Finally, his PC might have malware. That's the new twist. So, by the way, I asked the Windows XP team, I said, hey, wait a minute. If that old PC has malware, will the new one be infected? Guess what the answer was? Yes.
Very helpful.
Yeah. All right. So I made a big deal about the environment as being one of the three key elements to a good scenario, right? So first of all, the old PC's files and settings weren't all wanted, were they? That's really crucial information. And the fact that maybe the PC's infected in some way, that's also crucial, isn't it? That really tells us what a good solution is going to look like. All right, so to figure out what we want to do here, first of all, the new tool needs to really help assist users in selecting the programs and files to transfer because, quite frankly, they don't know by name exactly everything they need. Everything that gets transferred, we have to scan for security and performance, right? Because we don't want to infect the new machine. And third one, we don't want to infect the new machine. That's kind of a deal breaker, isn't it?
Yeah.
So without scenarios, we're doomed. I like that word. We're doomed to thinking about features and technologies because quite frankly, we don't have anything else. But by having this scenario, that's really going to help us understand from the user's point of view what it is we're trying to accomplish here. And so we can get beyond solving the problem mechanically. All right, so a few insights here. So first of all, I don't know what you're thinking of UI design is, but what I want to stress here, first of all, UI design is not happy talk. It's not feeling good about users, talking about empathy and the whole bit. This is real. We're really making the significant improvement to the quality of the product here by thinking this through. To do this well, we have to understand the users and their goals. That is absolutely crucial here. If we don't understand who the users are and what their goals are, we're going to miss all this stuff. We're just going to focus on the mechanics. And finally, offering a pile of features based on arbitrary requirements isn't a good substitute. All right, I want to compare scenarios to use cases and user stories because I'm expecting that, frankly, most people here aren't using scenarios but are using either use cases or user stories. Is that accurate? Okay, I don't see any no's, so that sounds good. All right, so for me, a user story is about capturing the user's goals and tasks as part of his or her role using a product, right? So it has this template of, as a user, I want to perform some thing supported by the program so that I can achieve something of value. So that's kind of the template for it. So the thing is, it's more of a requirement, kind of in a very user-centered way, but it doesn't really capture the whole story, does it? It kind of gives us a little piece of it. And a use case is more of a detailed analysis of a solution-specific scenario, right? So we know what the solution is. With the scenarios that we were looking at, the whole point behind those was to figure out what the right solution is. In terms of a use case, that has the solution in it. We're going to look step by step how the user is going to perform the task using the solution. So for me, these are both fine, but for me, they're not so much design tools as they are development tools. When I'm designing, I'm focused on the scenario, which is telling me what I need to do from the user's point of view, not so much the use case or the user story, because it's it's more of a development tool from my point of view. It's about figuring out how to develop it, and if you've got all the steps and everything, it's all working smoothly. So I see these as different things. All right, now at this point, I want to say that UX design is the product. Now some of you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, you've just gone and pulled a fast one. You've changed the product. And my thing is, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I've done. If anybody said, user experience design has to be involved in a product from the very beginning, this is what we're talking about. We want to make sure that we actually have the right product. The UI is not a thin veneer that we put over our technology. It is the technology. Steve Jobs has a fantastic quote here. He says that design is not just what it looks like and feels like, design is how it works. And I think he's really speaking on two levels here. We have a misconception that design is all about visual appearance, that it's all about making a UI look pretty. That's really not it. That's an important part of what we do, but that's kind of like the superficial, trivial part. What we really do is make products people want to use and meet their goals. Right? But another thing that I think he's saying here is that traditionally we as developers, we create the technology and the UI is just a thin veneer that we put on top of the technology. And I think what he's really saying here is that's exactly backwards. We need to figure out what the user experience is first and then create this technology required to support it. That we have a tendency to think about it backwards. We want to create the user experience first. That is the product. Then we figure out what technology we need to create to support that. Right, so, it's the user experience that should drive the features and technology, not the other way around. All right, so to put all this together here, so if we think about Chip, his goal, he needs a tool to securely transfer the programs that he uses and the files that he cares about. Isn't that his goal? That's the goal, right? His goal is not, I need a wizard to infect my brand new PC with viruses and malware and bloatware. That is not his goal, is it? But note that that is exactly the goal that feature was designed and optimized for. So, we can do better. All right, so scenarios help us understand the design problem from the user's point of view. That's what it's all about. We're focused on the user's goals. It's not just about getting the task done mechanically. The challenge is to make the design better. It's not to support the design, it's to challenge the design. We might end up changing what it is we're doing in order to achieve the user's goals. All right, so I want to change gears a bit here. So I want to talk about another tool. So we're done with the files and settings transfer. Unfortunately, we're done with Chip as well, so we're talking about him anymore. But I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about effective human communication. So to get that going, what I'd like to do is share a kind of a hypothetical situation with you. So suppose we're working together as a team, and suppose we've got a new project, and we recognize that having a great user experience is absolutely crucial to the success of this project. Now, I don't know why we never realized that before for other stuff, but right now, for this project, it is absolutely crucial to our success. We recognize that. Unfortunately, we don't have anyone on our team who is experienced with UX design. We've got developers, we've got managers, we've got testers, we've got business analysts, we've got, I don't know, writers perhaps, but we do not have any UI guys. And unfortunately, we don't have a budget to hire one of these UX consultant guys. So we're kind of on our own here. But not to worry, we've got our two best developers, Bob and Alice. Bob and Alice are bright, smart, articulate. The team respects them. They get things done. They're fantastic engineers, so we've put them in charge of the UI. So Bob and Alice are designing the UI. They don't have any design experience, but nevertheless, we have a lot of confidence in their abilities. So Bob and Alice have gone off and they've done apparently all the right things. They've talked to us, they've talked to the stakeholders, they've talked to the customers, they've locked themselves in a conference room and done a lot of stuff on whiteboards and sticky notes, and they've used fancy words like user empathy. And so from a distance, it looks like things are going well, but we haven't seen their design yet. In fact, we're about to see their design for the very first time right now. And so with that in mind, I'd like to ask you two questions. So we've never seen the design before, but I want to ask you, how good do you think the design is going to be? That's first cut. Second of all, how well do you think the meeting is going to go? Now, of course, these are highly hypothetical. There's no right or wrong answer here. We don't know for sure. But nevertheless, based on your experience, what would you expect to happen here?
They'll play design Tetris.
Perhaps, yeah. So as features come in, they'll kind of like drop them where they have to fit.
Opinions will come out. Opinionated. I can't talk.
Okay.
Opinions. People want to design it differently than everybody else, so they'll fight about it. Maybe.
Okay, a fight might break out. Different points of view. Maybe we don't get agreement on the direction. It's possible. What else?
Well, who's in the meeting? This meeting that you have, I mean, are these guys involving the users at first, or when are the users getting introduced in this process?
Well, I haven't defined that, but all I know for sure is they were involved at some point. So it's not like they did it without talking to users at all. They actually did that. We know they did that.
And so with the meeting that's going to happen, the users, is it being presented to?
Oh, to the team. There are no users in the room.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the team would probably like it.
Okay.
That would be great.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts before I reveal my hand here?
Probably redesign it.
Okay. Right. The manager will blast into the last minute.
Right.
Change it.
Right.
All right. So here's my expectations. So first of all, I don't think the initial design will be very good. Why? Because even though Bob and Alice are bright, smart, articulate, the fact of the matter is they don't have any design experience. So they're going to make those classic programmer mistakes that I just talked about. They're going to design like a programmer. Even though they're trying really hard not to, they're going to do it. Why? Because all programmers do that. This is what we do. So they're not going to be even aware of the issue. But I do think that their explanation to the team when they present it to us, as a team, we're going to get it, right? So they might display some UI and we'll go, ooh, and then they'll explain it. We'll go, okay, I understand what they're doing now, because once they've explained it to me, I get it now. Does that seem reasonable? I'm sure you've had that experience.
I don't think they go, ooh. I mean, if you got
That was a bad ooh, by the way.
Okay.
That was not a good ooh. That was
All
a-
right, but
a
even,
ooh.
I wasn't, I don't think it's gonna be a bad, I mean, if I'm tracking with what you're saying, it sounds to me like we all tend to think, programmers tend to think similarly, you know, so.
But if you've never seen it before, if you don't get it, you're going to be confused, right?
Okay,
Yeah, that's what I'm after.
okay.
And no one will be honest enough to say, I don't get it.
Okay.
If they report to the Bob, or whatever.
Okay, so they might not say that, but they might think it. Perhaps.
Well, especially if everybody thinks that they're rock stars anyway, they'll just accept what they've given as really good, because this was designed by rock stars.
And that's very possible, right? Because they have a good reputation with the team, where we respect their work, we're probably going to give them a free pass that we might not give to somebody else. So that's very possible. But the thing I want to point out here, the big surprise for me here, is not that the design is bad and not that their explanation is good, but that the two are so different. Which is to say, why is it that when Bob and Alice explain to the task that needs to be performed to us in person, we totally get what it is they're saying. But as soon as they try to do it through the language of UI on the screen, all of a sudden we're confused. Why is it that smart, highly articulate people can communicate extremely well in person, but have such a hard time through UI? What's different about it? What's going on here? So the interesting thing that I want to share with you is that when we communicate in person, we're totally focused on the user's goals. We're thinking, what does the user care about now? So if we're explaining how to do the task, we're putting it naturally in terms that we know the target user is going to understand, right? So hopefully you've never had a conversation where you're explaining something to somebody and they say, you know what, that explanation was totally unintuitive. Right? When we do it in person, we are naturally intuitive, right? Because we understand what the person understands, don't we? And we explain it in those terms. However, when we do it in UI, we have a tendency to use a completely different way of explaining things. We have a tendency to focus on the technology and the details. We're more focused on what the program needs rather than what the user needs to know. So my belief here is that UI is ultimately about communicating tasks to users. And so a user-centered design is going to communicate well on a human level. If it feels like a natural, friendly conversation, it's probably a good design. The things we would say in person is probably the stuff we should have on the screen, something very similar to that. And that we should have the same approach and the same standards. So for example, if something would be rude or inappropriate in person, I think we should consider it equally rude or inappropriate with software. We shouldn't be giving software a free pass for rudeness. All right, so here's a technique that I use all the time that I find fantastically valuable. So I want to share this with you. So kind of imagine a situation where the user is using your software, maybe they're at the computer, and you're kind of like casually looking over their shoulder as they're working, and at some point they stop and ask you, what am I supposed to do here? I want you to think about the answer you would give in person. The things you'd say, the steps, the order, the language you would use, and also put some thought into stuff you wouldn't say, because you know the user just doesn't care. And I think that's a fantastic high-level guide for what our UIs ought to look like. And in fact, I use this technique all the time. So going back to the Bob and Alice situation, if Bob and Alice were presenting the UI to me, or to the team, and I'm there, right? I'm going to listen to what they say. I'm going to compare it to what's on the screen. If there's a difference, I believe what they say in person is the right explanation, and what they have on the screen is the wrong explanation. So I'm going to look for those differences, and I'm going to ask, why did you say it that way, and you had it some other way on the screen? Usually the way we say it in person is the right way. What we have a tendency to do is translate it into meaningful terms when we say it in person. All right, I want to talk about intuitive task flows. This is actually based on a technology that was kind of developed and then later abandoned at Microsoft, but I think there's a lot of value to it. If you've ever heard of inductive UI, that's what I'm talking about. It's an interesting thing that was really hot for a very brief period of time and then it kind of fizzled out. But I think there's something to it. It's very important. So the idea behind an inductive UI is that it leads users through a task. It's self-explanatory at a task level so that users understand at each step in the task what it is they're supposed to be doing. So the goal behind inductive UI is to eliminate thought, experimentation, documentation, and training at the task level. We understand how to do the task because it explains itself. By the way, a clear sign that your UI is not intuitive is if you need a user manual or if you need training. Basically what a user manual is a document that explains all the unintuitive UI. Right? Isn't that what it is? If our UI is intuitive, we don't need a user manual, do we? All right, so to give you a simple example of what I'm talking about, here's what I would call a deductive, or in other words, the opposite of what I'm after here, a deductive UI. So I have a quick question for you. What do you do here? Okay, all right, very good, very good. So you add things, but the more important question, How did you know that? How did you figure that out?
Start from the left, work my way down the bottom right of the screen,
And?
in that process, I saw it being used an app.
Or to kind of fill in a few extra words, you scanned across it, and through the process of elimination, you decided that that was the only thing to do, right? All right, that's the only, so we've got an empty list of things, we don't know what the heck that is. We've got an enabled add button, so we can do something there perhaps. We've got remove properties, we don't know exactly what they're for at this point, but they're disabled, we don't care. We've got OK cancel, they are enabled, but we recognize they're not going to get us anywhere, are they? So the only thing you can possibly do is click add, right? What I want to point out though is that that's how we often present UIs. We have to like look at them and kind of deduce what it is we're supposed to do. Why? Because the UI doesn't tell us. Why don't we tell people what they're supposed to do? Why do we make them figure it out using logic and deduction? Doesn't that seem wrong? All right, so let me give you another example. This is inductive. This is from Microsoft Windows 7. Now this one says, choose the account you'd like to change. And it's very similar to the previous UI. It's got a list of stuff. It's got some commands hanging off that list of stuff. But note that it actually tells us what to do. Now, we could figure that out on our own. It's not that big of a deal, but nevertheless, again, the question is, why do we force users to figure stuff out all the time? Why can't we, on occasion, tell them what it is we're supposed to do? The first question anybody has when they look at a new UI is, what am I supposed to do here? And we almost never answer that. Why don't we answer? That's what this concept's all about, is answering that question. So there's really two parts to this concept. The first idea is that we want to come up with a clear main instruction that explains the purpose of the page or the screen that we're looking at. And the other thing is we want to actually design around it. So we have the instruction, we want to make sure that the design of the page actually matches that instruction. And if we do both of those things, we're going to end up with better page design. So to be clear, the main instruction is a design tool. We don't necessarily have to literally put it on the page unless we really need it. So don't get too worked up about that yet. That's not a requirement. So I'm going to show you an example of this in a moment here. But again, the goal behind this is to make it intuitive, to eliminate the need for thought, experimentation, documentation, and training. It's not to have a bunch of text that we don't need. That's not what I'm after here at all. But what I am after is answering that question everybody has when they look at a UI. What am I supposed to do here? Never answer that question. And another thing is that second step, making sure that everything is clearly related to that instruction. That's a great way to make sure we're not playing UI Tetris. The page has integrity. Everything's there because it needs to be there. It's not because it fits. All right, so I want to just show you an example of the UI. Now, here's the thing. If you know what this UI does, please do not say anything. And in fact, I was just in London last week, and the entire team was very familiar with this UI, so this didn't work very well. But if you've never seen this before, I want you to try to figure out what this program does. Don't say anything yet. Just try to figure out what the program does. And for everybody, I have one more question, which is, suppose you were responsible for this UI, and you wanted to improve the design. I want you to just take a guess as to how much time it might take. You know, hours, an hour project, weeks, a month. How much time would it take? How much investment would it take to fix this? All right, so who has never seen this UI before can tell me what it does? What is this program for? Yes?
It's a front end for the WCAG command.
Okay, that's... Yeah, okay, so you know what it's for then.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've never seen the UI, but I know what wget is, so I know where this is going. Does that mean I know it or I don't know
It
it?
means you know it. Yeah, if you know what wget is, you're disqualified. For those of you who do not know what wget is, what's going on here? What does this thing do? By the way, in case you're not impressed by this UI, note the default button. No, this is the easy UI. If you want to get really serious, you got to go into promo.
Is it a utility to capture something off the web?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so very good. How long did it take you to figure that out?
Well, you look at, you need an URL, you're capturing, what are you capturing, the file types? I don't know. Those are kind of clues.
But you didn't get it right away, right? You had to think it through.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, so very good. Yes, that's what it's for. By the way, I talk about designing like a programmer and sticking data structures directly in the UI. Can you just see the data structures here? I mean, isn't this just a bunch of data structures? In fact, it is in fact a front end for a command line, but same difference, right? It's just a big data structure, isn't it? All right, so now I want to present to you my redesign of the UI we just saw. And again, same question. I want you to try to guess what the purpose of the program is. Okay, see if you can do it. Ready? Okay, what is this for? How were you able to figure that out? Isn't that amazing? First question everybody has is, what is this thing for? This one actually answers it. And I don't think that's weird. This is not crazy looking. You know, this looks fine. It's not like this is just some bizarre thing that I came up with. This looks normal to us, but it does something we normally take for granted, which is actually explain to people what they're supposed to do. Now, I have a second question here, which was, how long do you think it would take to redesign that UI? In fact, I paid attention to how long it took me to come up with this UI, and the answer was 15 minutes. And 10 of those 15 minutes was required to figure out this thing, because quite frankly, I had no clue what that UI was for on the previous. I had an idea. It turns out I was wrong. I had to grovel through the user manual for about 10 minutes just to figure out what the program was for. Then I came up with that instruction, and I'm like, okay, I know how to design this. And I designed the rest of it. It took like 5 minutes. But the thing is, now that I know what this thing is for, I know how to make these decisions with confidence. By contrast with this, what do you do with that? All right, and also I talked about this idea of feeling like a natural, friendly conversation. You know, doesn't this feel like a natural, friendly conversation? So, okay, so you want to copy some files for backup or offline viewing, okay? Tell me where you want to copy them from. Give me the URL. Tell me where you want to copy them to. You know, what do you want to do with large files? Unless you've got some extra request, we're good to go, right? Isn't that what this conversation is? What's the conversation here? Does that feel like a natural, friendly conversation you would have with another human?
Sounds like a crowd of people talking right next to me.
That's right. Right, that would not be much of a conversation. All right, so that's what I'm talking about. So this feels like an actual human conversation. The other one doesn't. You know, it's not literally a dialogue. It's not like we've got a movie script here. It's not that. That's not what I'm after here. But it feels like stuff we'd actually say in person. And it's a good design.
Before we move on, can I make another comment?
Absolutely.
I think we're lacking a scenario which presents who our user is.
Right.
I always perceive wget as a tool for power users. A GUI for it, I would think, would be a tool for a power user. If the intended audience is a power user, this UI is a step in the wrong direction, because they're always going to have to click that advanced button and go into everything. You just added an extra step of tediousness for the power user.
So if I've done my job correctly, and perhaps I haven't, because I actually only spent 5 minutes on it, but you know, if this were for real, what I would do is make sure that as a power user, that almost never happened. Okay? I'm taking for granted that most of the time you're not twiddling with all this stuff. I could be totally wrong. But nevertheless, there's an interesting thing here, which is, who's the target user for this? I think it's supposed to be for novice guys. I don't see this as, you know, this is not the pro mode, is it? If I'm an expert, am I using the command line? Isn't the GUI to make the command line experience better for people who don't know the command line? It seems to me the target user was, in fact, not experts of this, and as a result, I think this design fails.
I don't know. I guess maybe the problem is I'm the target user for that GUI, I think. Because I use wget somewhat frequently.
Okay.
When I do, I frequently need to change the options. It's very rarely consistent from one usage to the next. So I always need to be able to go in and adjust the options. But I don't use it frequently enough that I have all the command line flags memorized.
Okay.
And so having this to automatically fill those in from a quick point and click what I want would be absolutely perfect for me.
So my claim is that we can make this work for you.
Okay.
But obviously, I have not invested that time to make that happen. But the key to success there is, could we come up with a set of default options so that most of the time you do not have to click any of these extra buttons to make the right thing happen? I have confidence that that's possible. Given the nature of this task, I don't see that as being an impossible challenge. Fair enough?
Maybe. I guess in my usage, the options always change from one usage to the next. So there's no set of defaults that would work most of the time.
How many of those options change?
Maybe about half of them, maybe more. In my usage. Maybe I'm atypical.
You are definitely not my target user.
That's normal.
Because my assumption is that either we don't need to change them most of the time, or there's a small number, such as I've started to suggest here, that we could put directly on the UI. And so these other things really truly are advanced, and we rarely need to change them.
Fair enough.
That was my assumption.
Okay.
This whole point of this discussion is that you're being too you-centric.
Well, and I'm looking at it as me as a user, not me as a developer, because I've never been a wget developer, but I use it as a tool somewhat regularly. So in that case, I'm thinking I am the user, not a developer. And so I'm thinking me-centric, but from a user's point of view. But I may be a very atypical user.
Yes.
I'd be willing to accept that.
Yes.
But despite of the specific challenges you've identified, the thing I really want to focus on here is two things. First of all, this idea that we never communicate what our UIs are for. It's the first question we have. There's something to be said for actually figuring that out. The other is this is actually a fantastic design tool. Once we understand what a thing is for, we can use it as a tool to help us design a page.
Right.
And I'm hoping you're seeing, even though you've got some qualms about this particular design, I'm hoping you see that that actually is working here.
Right, right.
All right, so I want to give this one more go. So it turns out I've got a thing about home pages. And so, I'm sorry, what I meant to say is I've got a thing about dashboards. So the interesting thing about dashboards is they're kind of a pile of stuff, usually, right? Or more specifically, a configurable pile of stuff. So we don't really put a whole lot of design thought into these things on the assumption that if users don't like it, they can just configure it, right? So I've got a dashboard, I don't like it, well, you can configure it to do whatever you want. All right, so I think we can actually use this technique to do a little better. So as it happens, I was working with the designer of this particular product, so just to quickly explain what it's for. This is a tool that is used for volunteer fundraisers. Right? So they're kind of trying to keep track of what it is they're doing for their fundraising effort for a particular nonprofit organization. So that's the basic tool. So I was working with the designer of this, and so I said, okay, let's give this a quick go. Let's see if we can come up with a main instruction for this. So I said, what would be a good main instruction for this UI? And he said, dashboard. Oh, that was funny. All right, he said dashboard. Okay, so I said, okay, good. All right, what are users likely to be doing here? And he said, well, anything they want is a dashboard. And I said, okay, but what are they most likely to be doing really here? Be more specific. And he says, well, not really, because it's a configurable dashboard. But I didn't give up, so I just keep after him. I keep asking these questions, and finally he says, okay, fine. All right, probably what's going on here is that volunteer fundraisers, they care about two things. All right, they care about making their monthly quota, because that's how they're evaluated. They want to know if they're on track for making their monthly quota. Another thing they want to know is, do they have any donors that they need to contact right away? Those are the two things they need. All right, actually I missed a step here. I was going to ask you, what did you think of this UI before I gave my explanation? Assuming I had done that, what do you think of this UI now that we've gone through that exercise?
It's pretty busy.
Do you think it's well designed for the target user's goals? Right, it's missing those elements, isn't it? So even though it's a dashboard, even though it's configurable, even though we don't know for sure what people want to do, applying this technique is going to help us evaluate even something as generic as a dashboard to help us determine if it's a good design. Based on that exercise, I'd say, you know what, we can make this a little better. By default, we can kind of tighten it up to focus on those things that people most likely want to see. So by the way, just want to promote the fact that I just written a new book, by the way. It's called UI is Communication, where a lot of the techniques I'm talking about come from. It's a brand new book. It just came out at the end of June. So this is brand new. If you'd like to take a look, I'd love to share it. In fact, I wouldn't mind passing it over if you want to take a look. So if you're interested in this type of design thinking, I've actually wrote a book on the whole topic. All right, I've got one more thing for you, and that is I want to talk about design culture. So again, I kind of want to give you a personal story from the Microsoft point of view. And so I joined Microsoft in 2000. And at the time, you know, I was having that developer background, very interested in design. I had the opportunity to speak to a lot of thought leaders at Microsoft about design. And one thing I found that was very interesting is the consistency of their thinking. They would say, you know what, design is great, we really appreciate design, but you know what, it really doesn't matter that much to our customers. What matters to our customers to make sales is features, price, performance. That's how we sell product to customers. Features, price, performance, maybe market share. That's what matters most to our customers. And the proof? Look at Apple. So in 2000, you know, Apple, they had like no PC market share, their stock price was in the toilet, they were going absolutely nowhere. So look at Apple, they got all this great design, what good is it? It's not getting them anywhere, is it? So that was their thinking. It's like, look at Apple. So, of course, you know, at the time they were probably right, but you know, they're not saying that anymore, are they? The thing is, the world has changed since 2000. We now live in a world where people want to love the user experiences that they have with the products. They want to feel great about the products they're buying and they're using. People want to have an emotional connection to the products they're using. We don't want to buy these complex, unintuitive, hard-to-use products that require time, effort, and training. Those days are kind of gone. We don't want to do that anymore. And my evidence for that? Well, look at Apple. Look at Apple today. You know, they're creating products that people want to buy. I was in California in June, and I went to one of the malls there, and they had both a Microsoft store and an Apple store. I went there twice. In the Microsoft store, guess how many non-employees were in the store both times? Three?
One.
Is there a, well, not counting myself, both times, same number, 6 people. Mostly kids playing Xbox games. Had a big staff of salesmen, not that many customers. How many people do you suppose were in the Apple store?
20.
About 50 plus.
The answer is too many to count. It was like a full store. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you know, this is working hours. Don't these people work for a living? What the heck are they doing in the Apple store during working hours? But the darn store was full of people wanting to buy Apple products. Really quite extraordinary. You know, people are actually thrilled to buy a product. You know, this idea of standing in line to get the newest iPhone or something like that, that just seems crazy to me, but people actually do it. It's really quite extraordinary. So, of course, this is showing up on the bottom line. Jim Collins wrote a book called Good to Great, and he tries to make the case about certain good companies that became great companies and kind of uses stock prices to kind of demonstrate that they, in fact, became great. Of course, there's kind of limits to that thinking. Obviously, Enron was a great company until the day it wasn't, so we don't really know for sure. Nevertheless, I think there's something to be said for this. That if you look at the bottom line between Apple and Microsoft, Microsoft's not doing that well, really, whereas by contrast, Apple is doing quite well. You know, it would be simplistic to say it's just about design. Certainly execution and other things behind that are really very, very important. And even though Apple stock has been getting kind of spanked lately, if you compare the performance, it's still quite extraordinary what the difference is. By the way, I'm still a Microsoft shareholder. All right, so the bottom line for business is that great design sells, bad design costs. It costs us in terms of training, technical support, lost sales. So this is important for us as a business. I want to make the claim that the iPhone and other smartphones like what we have in Android as well are setting the UX quality bar. We're walking around with these great user experiences in our pockets. We know what a great user experience looks like now, and we're starting to have the expectation that we're going to have that same great user experience in that expensive business software that we're spending $10,000, $20,000 to buy. You know, a lot of this software is really old, it's poorly designed, it's hard to use, it requires a lot of time, patience, training, technical support to get to work. That game is not going to work very well in the future. I've got a lot of customers who are kind of in that situation. They've got old, powerful legacy products, and they're telling their customers, look, we understand that you have higher expectations now, and we're redesigning our products to make them better. And I think that's a fantastic excuse. But I don't see that excuse lasting a whole lot longer. I think we're going to be in the world where if you don't have an easy-to-use product that people enjoy using, people simply aren't going to buy it anymore. They're going to look at the products that are easy to use. We have this expectation based on this experiences that we have in our pocket. We know what it looks like now. I don't think RTFM cuts it anymore, right? I work with a lot of companies. It's like, you know, users don't get it. We'll just put something in the user manual. That's just not a good strategy. So, some shocking facts. Believe it or not, many software teams just don't care. They don't see it. Or alternatively, I might be with, they're selling a service and they say, we're not in the software business, we're in the service business, we don't care. It's not our problem. We don't care, it's not important to us. They're completely focused on shipping features on time. I understand that's how engineering teams work. I appreciate why that happens, but we can't miss the fact that we're not creating products that our customers want to use. And very often they kind of view this stuff that us user experience people do as kind of like, artsy, fussy stuff that's just kind of an annoyance. We just want to get the stuff out the door. We don't want to waste our time worrying about these little details. So, in other words, I think to some degree, the appreciation of great user experience design is ultimately a team culture problem. That what we ship as a product is a reflection of our team's culture. And if as a culture we don't respect or value a great user experience, it's not going to happen. When it comes to making the decisions, scheduling the time, spending the money, we're not going to make those investments because we just don't value them. I believe that every artifact an organization creates is an embodiment of its culture. If you think about the projects your team takes on, the vision it has, the goals, the team members, how you recruit, how you reward, your willingness to make daring design decisions, your willingness to fix the small bugs, your willingness to spend the time and effort required to create a great user experience, those are all a reflection of your team and your company's culture. And if you don't value these things, none of these things are going to happen. These UI guys are kind of scary, if you're technical. This is actually Marilyn Manson. I don't know if he's a designer or not, but for technical people, this is what designers look like. They're kind of scary. All right, so if you want a better user experience, you have to make sure your team culture supports it. Why? Because ultimately we ship our culture. If our culture doesn't value these things, they will not happen. So kind of a little homework assignment for you today is to think about this. What does this mean? If your user experience isn't where you want it to be, is it because you don't know how to do it, or you don't have the skills, or is it because in fact your culture doesn't support it? And I think I'd like to suggest that if your team's culture doesn't support it, that's going to explain a lot. All right, so let's wrap this up. All right, so my theme for the day, don't design like a programmer. What does it mean? Well, first of all, it means don't design for yourself. You're not the target user. The fact that you know how it works doesn't get us anywhere. We have to think about our target users. We have to understand their goals, their tasks, and design specifically for them. We don't want to let features and technologies drive the user experience. That's not going to get us where we want to be. We've got to think about the users, their goals, their scenarios, their contexts. It's not enough to solve the problem mechanically. Just because it works mechanically isn't good enough anymore. We don't want to expose those raw data structures. That's not good enough anymore either. That's a mechanical solution. We don't want to expose everything all at once either. We have a tendency to want to stick everything on one screen. All right, so some solutions to these problems. Scenario-based design is a fantastic way of designing from the target user's point of view because it really helps us understand who they are, what they're doing, what they're trying to do, and what their goals are. Intuitive, user-centered designs communicate well on a human level. Ultimately, a UI is all about human communication. If it doesn't communicate well on a human level, it's not going to work. Inductive UI, this concept that I talked about, coming up with that main instruction, making sure that everything on the page is related to it, that's actually a fantastic technique. It's going to give us a lot of insight as to how good our designs are. And then finally, you ship your culture. So if your culture doesn't embrace great user experience, it's not going to happen. So I made up my law of UI design, which is if a UI merely exposes the raw technology to enable a task, it's probably not usable. We've got to do more than this. If you remember only one thing from tonight, it's that great products solve user goals in a way that reflects how the product is actually going to be used. All right, here's the part where I do the hard sell for a lot of you. All right, so I just want to say a few words about my company. So if you want to learn more, please check out my website, uxdesignedge.com. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions about this presentation. And by the way, this talk was inspired by my own blog post. What I did is I wrote a blog post called Don't Design Like a Programmer, and my stats just went totally crazy because it was discovered on Hacker News, and just people really responded to that topic. So I thought I'd develop it a bit, make it into a presentation. So that's what got me going here. But my blog post, I actually have 3 parts to it. The first one explains the problem, the next one gives a process, and the third actually shows applying the process to come up with a solution. If you're interested in this or want to share it with people on your team, feel free to look it up on my website. And I do want to say that one thing I do is I do a lot of on-site workshops. In fact, I just gave one here at FCSA. Jeff can tell you all about it. But if you're interested in design training at your company, I'd love to do it. I'd love to come back to Omaha and do another workshop. So this is what I do for a living. So if you're interested, please let me know. And I also do public courses as well. I've got one coming up in Chicago. So if by any chance, if you or someone on your team would like to attend a public class, we're going to have one on the Magnificent Mile. It's a wonderful place to have a class. So if you're interested in design training for you or anyone on your team, I'd recommend that you take a look at that as well. So it turns out Confucius attended one of my training courses, and here's his testimonial. He said, I hear and I remember. I hear and I forget, I see and I remember. I do a UX Design Essentials workshop, and I totally get it. So you couldn't ask for a better testimonial. Any questions? Yes?
You may cover this in your book and so forth, but to me, a lot of it depends on when a user sees something for the first time. You know, when you're designing something, and when a user sees something for the first time, it's almost like everything should be a wizard or something. You know, you really want to step them through it, but then it's like a different person. You know, after they know the software, then the whole thing is different.
Yeah.
Do you cover general ways to do that? You know, I understand what you were saying there, but it's almost like you've got 2 different people when you're talking about a user. You're talking about a user that's being introduced to the software, and then there's the user who's used the software, and basically it's the pro mode. You know?
Yeah.
Do you have pro modes for everything that you do?
No. So first of all, one interesting thing though is I would agree with you that, well, let's put it this way, a wizard is kind of designed to get first-time users through a task. The interesting thing about wizards though is it usually is, because they're inflexible and kind of tedious, they're really not the best choice for a lot of stuff. They're kind of overused. So that's kind of a challenge with that style of UI, because they're not very flexible. But I'll share with you one thought based on your assertion, which is, as it happens, if you look at my dedication, I dedicated it to Jan Mixowski, who kind of originally came up with this concept. He was on the money team at Microsoft at one point, and that's where he originated this inductive UI idea. And the interesting thing about what they did with money was they had this idea that when people were using Microsoft Money, that at first they didn't really get it, and as they used the product more and more and more, that they would kind of learn more and more. So each time they came back to it, they'd have an extra set of skills that they didn't have before, and over time build those skills. So what they did is what they call a longitudinal study, which is a kind of a fancy word, meaning they just looked at the same user over a period of time. And what they discovered is that did not happen. That each time the user went to Microsoft Money to do a task, they basically had to relearn it from scratch. Now, of course, there are tasks that we do all the time, every day. That's not what I'm talking about here, but kind of the infrequent thing that we don't really know how it works, and we come back to it a week later, that sort of thing. It's surprising how little we remember from the time before. So while I certainly agree that a wizard solution can be very tedious for people who know what they're doing, and that, totally agree with that, I'm not so sure if we learn as much as we think we do when we're doing a lot of tasks that we're not all that familiar with, right? So just to throw an example out there, and I'm sure there's somebody who uses FDisk every day, but try to think, when was the last time you used FDisk? If you were to go back to FDisk today, if it was the first time, right? It's like you have no recollection of what the heck that thing did until you see it again. You have to learn it again, as if you never used it before. Somebody always says, oh, I use FDisk every day. Okay, you're different. But most people, it's like you're starting completely over. And even though you might have used it 100 times, it's still, the next time you use it, you totally forgot how to do it, or what all the details are. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
So, what ended up with how did the dashboard end up?
I don't know. But the thing is, we have a way of thinking about it now to make better decisions. That's really the key thing I wanted to suggest. Yes?
Based on your past experience at Microsoft, how can you explain some of the colossal mistakes that they've made with UI design and things like Windows 8 for non-touch devices and Outlook 2013 and stuff like that. Where it's just way off where it should be.
Yeah, I can't explain it. So if you look at my resume, by the way, I'm totally off the hook for those. But just to give you a simple example, and that's the start menu in Windows 8, right? So I can't explain it. I wasn't there. I can actually play bad design CSI if you like. I can speculate. There's a very good chance I'm right. But like one thing I teach in my class is that I give all the details of what it means to be intuitive. And the first thing that we need to be intuitive is discoverability. We need something visible on the screen. Another claim I make is that not everything has to be intuitive. We can actually design certain things to not be intuitive, and that works just fine if they're basically optional, advanced, infrequent things that primarily expert users do for efficiency, such as shortcuts. It's absolutely fine to have an unintuitive shortcuts. In fact, all shortcuts are pretty much unintuitive to begin with, right? So, here we have a start menu. Is it optional, advanced, or infrequent? No. It needs to be intuitive. What do we need? Discoverability. I cannot explain what they were thinking. For me, this is a decision that takes a minute, and the decision is to have the start menu on the screen. I can't get it. So I think what they were, to play bad design CSI, I think what they were thinking was that people learn, and this is such a fundamental interaction that people will learn it somehow, and that it will be fun, and we can get rid of it. And sure, there'll be a little bit of training, but after that training is done, everything will be fine. I bet that's what happened. I'm willing to bet that they probably did usability studies and somehow managed to interpret that as being a support of that position. But just based on what I know and how I make decisions, I would have not supported that decision. So I can't explain it.
Having worked at Microsoft before as well, my explanation is someone thought it was cool not to have it, and that's what they did.
Well, right. So again, another equally plausible explanation is a VP level person said, "Hey, let's get rid of this." There you go.
It's cool. It's not happening.
Very good. Any other questions? All right. Well, I'd be happy to hang out a bit afterwards and maybe speak to you one-on-one if you like. But in the meantime, thank you very much. I appreciate your time and attention. It was great being here.